Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do part 2 of my YA book recommendations. I did part 2 because I have too many YA books to put in one video, because YA is a genre I have read and continue to read to this day. So I have a lot more book recommendations than I did in my children's book and middle grade book recommendation videos. Part 2 is going to be on books that are slightly less popular, less heard of than the books I talked about in my previous video. Some of these are still actually pretty well known, but again, just not quite as talked about on BookTube and Book Talk as the books I talked about in my first YA recommendation video. The first book I want to talk about is part of the Avatar series universe, the Avatar The Last Airbender universe. It is about Avatar Kyoshi. The first book is called The Rise of Kyoshi. The second book is called The Shadow of Kyoshi. I liked both of them just as much. So in The Rise of Kyoshi, it starts off with her and a bunch of others being raised in this orphanage and trained in this orphanage. Also in this orphanage is another kid that actually the world believes is the Avatar, not Kyoshi at the time. And this Avatar, who they think is the Avatar, is being trained by the previous Avatar's Team Avatar. So the previous Avatar was Avatar Kuruk, and he died relatively young, so his Team Avatar is still alive and kicking, and they are working to train the new Avatar. Obviously a big plot twist happens where it's not a spoiler to say it because this book is about Avatar Kyoshi. They find out that who they think is the Avatar actually isn't the Avatar, and Kyoshi is indeed the true Avatar. This book has high stakes just right there. The loss of all this time and effort training the wrong person, now that the time and effort has to be put into the new person. There is a unique threat to the world. There's a dangerous spirit that's on the loose. So time is of the essence. There's betrayal. So there's the tension of who do you trust. So lots of stakes that kept this book very interesting to me. It made it a page turner. I couldn't stop reading. I like this book for the main reason I like a lot of the Avatar content I read, Avatar The Last Airbender content I read. I find the way that they explore what it means to be basically a leader of the world so interesting and so unique. I don't see this done very often, where an Avatar is born. There's always an Avatar in the world, and when the Avatar dies, they're reborn into a new body in a new nation. And their job is to keep balance to the world and connect the physical world to the spirit world. But also, every time an Avatar is born, they are their own unique person with their own unique beliefs and personalities. So I like seeing how each unique person who happens to be the Avatar finds a way to be who they are and also be a leader and balancer of nations with all the responsibility that entails. And I liked seeing her being forced to accept an identity she thought belonged to somebody else, still learning who she is and how she does things, having to all of a sudden learn about these new powers she didn't know she had, and find her own Team Avatar to help her along the way. Actually, my favorite quote in this book has to do with and talks about the heaviness and responsibility of being Avatar. So here's the quote. "It'll never get easier. If you had a strict rule, maybe, to always show mercy or always punish, you could use it as a shield to protect your spirit. But that would be distancing yourself from your duty. Determining the fates of others on a case-by-case basis, considering the infinite combinations of circumstance, will wear on you like rain on the mountain. Give it enough time and you'll bear the scars." He spoke out of kindness and sorrow, perhaps not as immutable as he claimed to be. "You will never be perfectly fair, and you will never be truly correct," Lao Yi said. "This is your burden, to keep deciding over and over again." So just reading that quote, I felt the heaviness and the weight of the responsibility put on Kyoshi. As Avatar, you have to make decisions over and over again, and it doesn't affect just you, it affects the world, and it's always going to be heavy, it's always going to be a lot, it's always going to be exhausting, but it needs to be done. That is the Avatar's role, and hopefully she can get a supportive Team Avatar that can help her along the way in making these choices. It's important that she doesn't choose to just be all one way or all the other. Don't just show mercy always, don't just punish always, because then, sure, your job as Avatar may get easier for you, but it doesn't get easier for the world. So if you like a book about the nature of power to corrupt, because most Avatars are always fighting some corruption, some level of corruption somewhere, a book about how to be a good leader, and about the ethical dilemmas in politics, this is the book for you. The next book I want to talk about is also in the Avatar universe it's about another Avatar, and this is about Avatar Yangchen. The book is called The Dawn of Yangchen. It's another duology. Both books I loved equally. Both are great. So in this book, the Avatar Yangchen is just starting out as officially as the Avatar. She's just kind of been out in the world for a year or two by now-ish. She's just starting to take on the full responsibilities of traveling to all the nations and trying to figure out a way to find the balance and keep balance. She's still having to deal with everybody's expectation of her compared to her previous life as Avatar Seto, because Avatar Seto was a Fire Nation Avatar, and he primarily did his work in the Fire Nation, and the Fire Nation very much respected him. But because he made the choices he did, the consequences of those choices are now on Avatar Yangchen to rectify. Some of his choices were great, some of his choices were not. The conflicts of this book are there because of the choices Avatar Seto made, and so she's having to find ways to continue what successes Seto did have, but also fix his failures that he had during his time as Avatar. One being the fact that he never left the Fire Nation and really only focused on helping the Fire Nation. There's also the conflict of the fact that Avatar Yangchen is an air nomad, and the air nomads are, in my opinion, I would say the most unique of all nations. As in, as Avatar, she has to go out into the world and try to keep peace between all the nations, but she comes from a nation that believes in non-violence, doesn't believe in killing others, all things that the other nations definitely do and definitely practice and definitely believe in. So how is she going to be a balance to all these nations, technically kind of a member of all these nations, when she comes from one that believes so different from the rest? So she has that conflict and that tension of how does she be who she is uniquely, how does she be a member of the air nomads, and how does she be the Avatar? So there's three different parts of her identity pulling at her always. I liked how in Yangchen's books, that this was in Kyoshi's books as well, but particularly I found in Yangchen's books the questioning and thinking about human nature was present consistently throughout the book. I'm somebody who does that a lot, where I'll see somebody make a choice I wouldn't make, or behave in a way I wouldn't behave, or politicians who lead in a way I wouldn't lead, or say things I wouldn't say. Always question, why would they do that or say that? Why do we as humans maybe connect with that? Why do some people connect with those words and behaviors and support those words and behaviors when I don't? Or why do I support certain behaviors and others don't? This book did that a lot, and it makes sense because each Avatar is trying to keep balance to all the nations, and usually it's because humans are making weird choices that take the world away from peace, not closer to peace. So here's the quote that I really liked. "Rejection of peace was a story immemorial. The four nations were always trying their level best to march off a cliff. And here she was, the latest Avatar, attempting to drag them back from the edge. None of her past lives had succeeded in curbing the self-destructive nature of humanity." I have also thought that about the Avatar universe. I would question, well, we've had Avatar after Avatar after Avatar for thousands of years. Why isn't the world balanced yet? Why isn't the world at peace? But we have to accept that to live is to change. The nature of life is change. And when humans deal with too much change at a pace maybe that's too fast for them, or makes things feel very uncertain, humans can act out of fear, can live in their fear and act rashly and act in ways that doesn't support the world as a whole or the collective as a whole. And that's why you always need entities and people who work to try to bring the balance, to remind all of us humans that change can be scary, but we still have to put effort into recognizing how we keep the world as balanced as we can so that everybody can live as best of a life as possible. So we always need people working to remind all of us humans that there is a better way. We can always get closer to balance. We'll never be perfectly balanced. We always have to work to get close to it, because there's always going to be times and things happening out of our control that brings us away from balance. So unless you're purposeful about finding balance and staying connected to the world, you will move too far away from it. The Avatar is a very powerful single entity whose sole job it is to remind and help the world make sure that peace is always on the table. So if you like a book that is about the nature of power to corrupt, how to be a good leader, and the ethical dilemmas in politics, this is another book for you. So basically the same things that I took away in Kyoshi, or in the Yangchen books, I took away in the Kyoshi books, but they're two different avatars with their own two different personalities, living in two different times in the world with the same themes that they're exploring. And that's what makes it interesting, that the world will always need to be in balance. And here's two ways, two different people who try to balance it in their own way. The next book is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This is the decently well-known book because it was a nominee for a Goodreads Choice Award in 2017. I actually heard about this book from a Clockwork Reader who is one of my top booktubers. Basically in this world, it's a futuristic world where nobody dies anymore. If you die, you get brought right back to life. They have the ability to do that. But that also means that if nobody's dying and people keep reproducing, the world will eventually not be able to provide for all the humans that exist. So that means people have to die. So there is an organization of people called Scythes whose job it is around the world to kill a certain amount of people every year so that the population of the world remains sustainable. I really like this book because that was a very original concept that I've never seen or read or watched before. I liked how it explored the ethical dilemma of who gets to choose who lives and who dies. I'm actually surprised that the question of do we limit who's allowed to reproduce or not, that wasn't actually brought up. This book did a lot, so I'm okay with that not being brought up, but I think that was one area that could have been explored. That would have been interesting because obviously if you're saying, oh, I want to live forever and I want to reproduce, that's not fair, because if you reproduce and there's not enough resources to support that child you're choosing to have, then that takes away from somebody else's resources to live. So I think that would have been an interesting exploration as well. So actually one of my favorite quotes talks a little bit about the ethical dilemmas in this book, particularly an ethical dilemma that being a scythe itself brings. So the quote is, "Therein lies the paradox of the profession," Faraday said. "Those who wish to have the job should not have it, and those who would most refuse to kill are the only ones that should." That brought up the idea that we always say about leaders, those who want to lead probably shouldn't, and those who don't want to lead are probably going to be the best leaders. Same with this, if you want to kill people, you probably shouldn't. And if you don't want to kill people and the task needs to be done, it probably shouldn't be you, because you'll probably be as fair as you possibly can when doing it. So if you like a book about life versus death, the corruption of power, and benevolent versus malevolent technology, this is the book for you. The next book is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. This book was also a Goodreads Choice Award nominee in 2017. It's about a girl named Eliza who spends almost all her free time outside of school writing her very popular web series. And then a new kid comes to her school that she starts to get to know and enjoy being friends with. And she starts to question whether she should maybe start living more of her life in the real world and not so much online. And the big conflict happens when her anonymous identity online gets released, so the world knows who the author of her series is, and then her mental health hits an all-time low. I like this book because I like books about mental health. I liked how this book explored the toll of being online has on mental health. I hadn't really read or seen much of that, exploring mental health in our increasingly online world. I also like how it explored how much Eliza attached her identity and her worth to her ability to create and write her online series, to her work, and how when she hits her breaking point, it becomes clear that her all or nothing attachment to this one part of her identity is not healthy and not sustainable. My favorite quote has to do with Eliza's struggle with her own beliefs and thoughts about herself. So the quote is, "There's a small monster in my brain that controls my doubt. The doubt itself is a stupid thing, without sense or feeling, blind and straining at the end of a long chain. The monster, though, is smart. It's always watching, and when I am completely sure of myself, it unchains the doubt and lets it run wild. Even when I know it's coming, I can't stop it." So I related to this because it brings up the idea that we sometimes think, that I hear people say, where if you ever feel too much joy, that's dangerous because now you're vulnerable to having it ripped away from you. Just like where she's saying, well, when I do finally have those moments where I think I am enough, I have some self-confidence, I always find that it gets ripped away from me. So therefore I get suspicious when I have those good times because I'm expecting the bad times to follow very shortly after. So if you like a book about mental health, self-worth, anxiety, creativity, and wanting to be seen versus wanting to be in control, this is a book for you. The next book is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. This was actually a winner of a 2013 Goodreads Choice Award, so it's decently well known. It is very similar to Eliza and Her Monsters, which is probably another reason why I liked it. It is about a girl named Kath who is also very introverted, and she goes off to college for the first time with her twin sister, but her twin sister chooses to go and not be roommates with her and live her own life. So this very introverted, anxious Kath is forced to not only be in a new place, but with entirely different new people, without much of her previous life there to support her. She spends most of her free time writing a fan fiction online of one of her favorite series, so very similar to Eliza and Her Monsters. There's many instances where when she's put out of her comfort zone, she has to reconcile with her anxiety. She has to deal with her anxiety every time. I like this book because it's about mental health and anxiety, which I relate to, and particularly I liked how every time Eliza would be out with lots of people she didn't know, it would be clear that she would feel such exhaustion from having to try to put the work into reading everybody's social cues and trying to figure out what people expect of her and how she should behave. Because obviously when you're trying to figure out how to behave, that's mostly because you want to blend in. Because if you don't figure out what other people expect of you and you do something too outside of expectations, then you stand out, and you don't want that as an anxious person. And I related to that. My favorite quote in the book actually says, "In new situations, all the trickiest rules are the ones nobody bothers to explain to you, and the ones you can't Google." So that was Eliza when she was out one time, showing her frustration of how she has to know how to behave somehow, but nobody ever tells her. We as humans mostly figure out how to behave based on watching others, even if it maybe not entirely doesn't make sense. I do think that sometimes when I'm out in social settings, I'll behave like everybody else because that means I get to blend in and belong. But then I'm like, why are we doing this? Why are we saying this? Why do we stand the way we do? Why do we say the things we say? Why is this what's considered normal? And how each generation that changes anyway. Again, this goes back to me always questioning human nature. Why do we do the things we do? So if you like a book about anxiety, self-esteem, family, and friendship, this is the book for you. And the last two books are by my favorite author, who I don't see talked about too much on BookTube, but I love so much, so I'm going to always talk about her. The first book is called Wolf's Bane. It's actually like a follow-up series to one of my favorite series by her. That's one of her adult series. So in this adult series called Women of the Other World, it has this woman named Elena Michaels, who is a werewolf. She's in a lot of the books in that series. This Wolf's Bane book, this YA book, is a follow-up series about Elena Michaels' kids, werewolf children. So that's the main reason I picked it up. But I also liked it because I like Kelley Armstrong's writing. The premise of this book is that these two supernatural werewolf children they've gone to a supernatural teen camp, and while they're there, they're forced to solve a supernatural mystery. So I like how it's a fantasy setting in a world that I already know and love. It's a powerful coming of age book because these two teens are forced to go off for the first time away from their family, their werewolf family, into a new setting with new people. And I find that's the best way to force you to grow and really discover who you are, or at least start to, because you're always figuring out who you are. You just really start to do that as a teenager. And there's a lot of rewarding moments in this book where each character discovered at least what path they're on. Even if they didn't discover wholly who they are, they discovered this is the path that fits me best. And the supernatural mystery of it all just increased the stakes and made it so that the characters were forced to discover things about themselves even quicker. So if you like a book about identity, belonging, and family, this is the book for you. And the last book by Kelley Armstrong that I want to talk about is another YA book, YA series of hers. The first book is called Sea of Shadows. So this book is about two twin sisters whose job it is in their community to be the keeper and the seeker. And as keeper and seeker, their job is to keep the damned souls quiet. But this particular year, these damned souls are not being quiet, and they are becoming a threat to the world. So now these two sisters have to go on a journey to the Emperor to let the Emperor know of this threat so that they can collectively fight back. Because these two characters are on a quest and on an adventure for the first time, again, that means these teens get to be in a new setting with new people and learn more about themselves very quickly because they are in a dire situation. Again, great coming of age book. I liked how these two twin sisters, again, growing up, were forced to do a lot of the same things and not given very many opportunities to discover who they are as individuals. And the fact that they had to go off and get separated at times made it so that they found their own people, their own support systems, separate from one another, and they discovered what they liked, who they wanted to be, and their goals for their futures began to individualize, and I found that very satisfying. My favorite quote actually has to do with the adventuring part of this book. It says, "Curiosity is what lets a young mind grow and keeps an old mind young." Because obviously by going out into the world, you're going to be challenged to learn more about the world and about yourself. And the second part I really appreciated because I don't think much about that. But obviously, even when you're old, still being curious, still wanting to learn is going to keep you young because you're never done learning. So if you like a book about responsibility versus duty and self-actualization, this is the book for you. And that's it. Those are all the YA book recommendations I have for you in this video. Are there any of these books or authors that you have read? Or are you going to add any of these books to your TBR based on what you learned today? And with that, I am going to sign off and I will see you in my next video. Bye.